But what you can do, is you can actually use the gray underneath. So let me get that pencil back. So if I was trying to create a gradient surface from maybe this shape right here, what I can do is I can actually use, first I'm going to do the orange, and I'm going to use this 50% gray and go ahead and throw it down to the outside here. And then come in with the 30. Whoops. I got some streaks. Not too concerned with it. Going with the 30. And then once that's done, I can come back with my orange and go over it all. So I'm using the gray underneath the orange to add the gradient. And then I see that maybe there's not enough of a difference there, so I'll come back in with my 30 and put it on top. And one thing to take into consideration here is that this orange is somewhat of a light color, right? So I used a 50 and a 30, and that seems to do at least enough of the trick for me to accomplish what I want. If I wanted to add a little bit more contrast, then I could come back in with my 70 and just throw it down right here on the very edge. But that's with kind of a medium color, medium to light color. Well, what about a dark color? I've got this. What I'll do is I'll kind of mess up first, or I'll show you what doesn't necessarily work. Similar shape. And I'll use that same 50. And on this one, I'm just going to put a step over this way. And now I'm going to come back in with this, which is, wow, there's no name on it. Oh, parrot green. So I'm going to use parrot green and do the same thing that I did with the orange earlier. And you'll notice I don't pick up on as much of the contrast on this one as we did with the orange. And so the darker the color that you use, if you're going to use this technique, the darker marker you really need to use underneath it. So here's a 70% gray. With the green on top. And you'll see that that 70 pops a lot more. And in the very end, maybe I'll come back again with that 70 on top and add just one extra layer of darkness right up there in the edge. And so the opposite is true going in the other direction. If I've got a very, very light color, like a yellow, then I need to go maybe with 30. So here's a 30, but I'll use that same technique. Step it over. And come back in with a yellow on top of it. And the 30 is even almost too much for this yellow. Oh, that looks pretty good. I think the yellow actually sucked up some of the gray, but you can begin to see that gradient. Let me come back with that 30 out here. And so that's one additional way, other than buying a bunch of different colored reds or oranges and trying to make them work, because oftentimes, now that you guys are doing color theory, oftentimes those markers are actually just a completely different hue. It's not that the value is just changing, it's that the hue is changing on top of that. One other thing is, how can you with markers or some other thing kind of create the difference between a glossy surface and a flat surface? You know what I mean? A satin flat surface.
Leaving more white space.
What's that?
Leaving white space.
Leaving more white space. What was the other one? Contrast. Yeah. So on something that's flat like this book, you've got, or has a flat finish. That roll is it's pretty consistent, and there's not definitive. It's a little bit more like this. But if I wanted to make this look as though it was a little bit more glossy, yeah, it would be nice to leave the white. In fact, you know what? We'll make this look like it's more glossy because I do have some white in there. But what you want to do is you want to create, you still want to have some gradient in there, but you might want to create some steps. So coming back down here, if you leave a little bit more abrupt steps as opposed to a smooth transition, then those surfaces will begin to look a little bit more shiny. Alright, so lastly, a couple of things about just the direction of the marker and how you do it. You know, it's somewhat easy, even though I've gone outside the lines here, it's somewhat easy to do these things in a way if it's a linear, if it's a flat rectangular surface. But what do we do when we've got an awkward surface? And to me, the best thing to do is to try, like on this one, well, the first thing to do is just to come in, do the outline. And then as best you can, fan it if it's like this. And one thing also to keep in mind is markers are imperfect. I've seen some really awesome marker renderings. Even though I've got some steps in here, I'm not really that concerned about it. Now, if I'm going to do this one, this one's a little bit easier in that, you know, this is just a curved surface. I can work this in out here. I can do that. And then what I want to do is I want to follow essentially the curve of that surface as I fill this in. And the quicker I can go, the better, because then I might be able to come back and fill some of this in, maybe, and get rid of some of the streaks. So those are just some general thoughts that I've got. And this can work with quick rendering or adding some quick details, but I've just got a couple of things here that, this is just 8.5 by 11. This paper is extremely glossy, so I've just printed this out right before class. I've never rendered on it, and I'm wondering if it's going to be fairly similar to a Graphics 360 and less absorbent. But if I had sketched out these just kind of real quick exploratory concepts, and I just wanted to add a little bit more oomph, then I could come in, and already on some of these you can see that I've used my pen to create some additional shadowing and everything. But if I wanted to add a little bit more, then I'm not going to fill in this whole thing, but I can just add some quick rendering to this and begin to make it pop and also make that form stand out a little bit more. And so this is just, you know, in some quick rendering things. So even on some of these small ones right here, this 30 isn't showing up that great. But especially on orthographics, I can use this marker to begin to pop out some of these sketches. And obviously I chose not to do this originally on these, or else they would already have marker on them. And even with some of these, it looks like I could probably come in I'm leaving a lot of white space. But right there, it really helps me. Pop that out. And then the underside. So on cylinders and contours, just putting a little bit of marker in some areas to help that form pop out. Like even with small details like this, can certainly help the viewer read your sketch. And I'll do that just one more time with this. And sometimes, just like with the hatching, I just like to pick one side, one surface, like this one's facing me almost and a little bit to the left. And all I'm doing is adding some quick. I want to make sure that which I did not do, I want to make sure that I leave that white, but just in certain areas, like right there and across here, the inside of that little cylinder right there, something right here, just that little bit, no matter what it is, this is still that 50% gray, just that little bit of marker will help the viewer read what's going on. I can start to add in some of this that I never really finished on the sketch, but it begins to help the viewer see what's going on. On this one, we'll do the same surface, although it's going to be competing with some of the hatching that I did. But it's just a quick way to add contrast and readability to your sketch. And I prefer to use hatching and don't really do this method.